Greetings and welcome, everyone. This is a very special Building Power. I am your host, Zakiya Sankara-Jabar. Really excited to have this virtual town hall today. This is the first in a 4-part series where we here at Brightbeam, we're seeking common ground, right, in the education justice space. There's a lot happening in education, and we thought it was a good time to bring together a diverse group of voices, diversity in terms of what they bring to this space here in education, and also geographic diversity in terms of where folks are working specifically on these issues. So you'll see in a few minutes where I will allow people to introduce themselves and share a little bit more about themselves, also about the organizations that they represent, and a little bit maybe about the local landscape and where they reside. So again, thank you all for joining us. Will you please do us the pleasure of liking this video if you're watching us on Facebook or YouTube, also on Twitter, and share this virtual town hall. This is going to be a very, very important conversation in our Seeking Common Ground series. So we really want people from all walks of life, really. We want parents, we want students, we want educators, we want administrators, we want everybody to be a part of this conversation. Please join us in a lively discussion in the chat. Feel free to drop a few questions, and maybe towards the end, we may be able to bring up a few of your questions. So if you have questions, make sure you drop those as well. So without further ado, I want to bring up our panelists, and each and every one of them will introduce themselves. I will start with Alicia Dixon. Hi, Alicia. Welcome.
Oh, good morning from Oakland, Zakiya. Thank you very much. I so appreciate the invitation to be a part of this conversation with this illustrious panel this morning. So thank you. My name is Alicia Dixon. I am the executive director of the Marcus Foster Education Institute. I've served in that role for about 11 years now. We are a small education advocacy organization based in Oakland, California. We were founded by the first African-American superintendent of schools for Oakland, Dr. Marcus Foster. And for those of you who aren't familiar with his story, he comes out of Philadelphia as an education reformer in the late 60s, early 70s. He is someone who regularly turned around schools and helped students achieve greatness academically. Students who were discarded and thrown away were able to thrive in education settings where he was the leader. He came to Oakland in 1970 and was assassinated in 1973. There are lots of speculation about the reason for his assassination, but it is tied to some of the reform efforts that he was attempting to put in place. In terms of my background, I am public health trained, so I am a multidisciplinariist. I believe that it takes a collection of thoughts and processes for our society to thrive and for marginalized students to succeed and to receive all that they need in the classroom and in community. In the time that I've served as executive director, we've shifted our focus from being a direct service boutique size outfit to one that focuses on how we influence and change very large systems. And that includes school districts. And we focus as an organization on using continuous improvement methods with systems change and equity at the center.
Amazing. Thank you, Alicia. And thank you for sharing that history. That also brings to mind, we also lost a colleague of ours recently, Dirk Tilston, there in Oakland under, I would say, also nefarious circumstances. I believe the Oakland police chief just announced yesterday that he believed his home was targeted. specifically. So Oakland has a very interesting track record when it comes to people who are fighting for the rights of each and every child to have an access to and receive an equitable education. So thank you for sharing that. And if I should have done this at the top, but if we could just take maybe 1 minute of a moment of silence to remember our colleague Dirk, who was murdered this past weekend on Saturday in a home invasion. So we'll just take a moment of silence. Thank you so much. And Alicia, I'm glad I started with you, because when you said that about Dr. Foster, I said, wow, something similar just happened Saturday to another education justice fighter there in Oakland. So anyway, thank you for that. I want to also acknowledge that we initially had Becky Pringle, who was going to be a part of this illustrious panel from the National Education Association. She also sends her regrets. She was invited to a White House meeting. So we know things like that take precedence, right? So she is the president of the largest union in our country, National Education Association. But we are here with Christine Sampson Clark, who is filling in for Becky Pringle, the president. And Christine, please introduce yourself and welcome to this panel.
Thank you so much. Hi, I am Christine Sampson Clark. I'm a 9th grade math resource room teacher in Trenton, New Jersey. I'm so excited to be here representing my town and my students. I do plenty of things in Trenton, but I sit on the NEA Executive Committee, and proud to be here representing and supporting Becky Pringle and her vision for supporting public education as a common good, making sure our students have access to a diverse and global education. We just really want to work hard. NEA has been around since the late 1800s. We merged as a diverse union in 1966, a great year to be born, when NEA and the ATA merger happened, merging what was an all-white education association with the all-Black education association, recognizing the need to provide diverse support for all students, to make sure that all students have access to a quality education. As you shared, NEA is 3 million members strong, the largest labor union in the country. And Becky's vision for us, working with our in-the-class educators, our support staff, bus drivers, secretaries, custodians, security guards, nurses. We also have public labor workers that we represent. So we have a very diverse union that covers the gamut of everything that students are involved with, students and their families. So we are very excited to be here today to talk about the future of education and where we need to be strong and unified together.
Awesome. You're in the right place. Thank you so much, Christine. And we're so happy that you were able to fill in for Becky. Welcome. And now I will bring up Dan Weisberg. Dan, thank you for agreeing to be with us today as well. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Zakiya, and really an honor to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Appreciate that you all at Brightbeam are doing this series to bring common ground, because there's not enough efforts, in my view, in education to try to find the common ground or just have a good, honest discussion. Dan Weisberg, I have the honor to be the CEO of TNTP. For those who don't know us, we're a national education nonprofit that was founded 24 years ago by teachers. Our mission is about bringing justice to public education. And we do that, my 400 colleagues and I do that in hundreds of communities across the country, everything from big cities to small towns to everything in between in every region of the country. And we do that by focusing on the who are the adults that we're surrounding our students with. So we do things like teacher preparation and principal preparation, making sure that we are providing really outstanding, diverse talent of people who really believe in the brilliance of all of our kids, We worry about and work with our partners about the what. What are we asking students to do in schools across the country? And does it honor their aspirations and their families' aspirations and their communities' aspirations? And we also worry a lot about the how. How are school systems connecting to community, to students, to parents, to community stakeholders? Are they setting up really authentic ways for two-way communication? That's an area where in education, I think we probably all agree we have some work to do. And we do policy advocacy. We try to bring what we learn from classrooms and school systems across the country together to identify the obstacles to excellence and equity, do some research around that, and advocate for policy and practice change. And I came to TNTP 12 years ago after spending 6 years in the New York City Public Schools. I'm coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, as a proud product of the New York City Public Schools, the son of parents who are products of the New York City Public Schools, and the parent of two sons who graduated from the New York City Public Schools. So honored to be here. Really looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. I told you guys we have an amazing panel here. Last but certainly not least, is one of my favorite people, Adriana. Please welcome to this panel and introduce yourself to the audience.
Muchas gracias. Thank you. It is an honor to be here with you all. My name is Adriana Cerrillo, and who am I? I'm a good troublemaker for the system. I consider myself a person that I honor and thank my ancestors for giving me the spirit of being a fighter and for standing up for justice at every single level. I am a business owner. I own my own consulting business, Radical Consulting Solutions. I've been doing contract work for different organizations in the last 5 years here in the state of Minnesota. But prior to that, I lived in Florida for 20 years, where in 2006, I founded a nonprofit, the Juliana Mateo Foundation for Disabled Farm Workers. And that was kind of like the beginning of my journey to enter the world of not only activism, but to understand how policies really have killed our communities of color. And I decided to take action and do something about it without even honestly knowing what I was doing. I was in college at the time, and a friend of mine asked me to visit an undocumented immigrant that was in the hospital. And I came to visit her, and I had never met her before, but we made a very special connection. I was a young mother myself at the time, and I said to her, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I promise you that I'm going to help you. And out of that, I started working with community leaders in the Latin community and with the media and mobilizing different forces. And we ended up founding a nonprofit and to save her life. So that was the beginning of incredible things in my life. 3 years later, 2010, I co-founded an academy for youth, Future Leaders Academy, with an organization called unidosnow.org. And that academy was created to help our Brown students and Spanish-speaking families to navigate the system and to help our students get into higher education. That was like the moment where, I kind of like felt something so incredible personally, like a vision. If we don't work to open the pathways for our children to be the leaders that they are and to provide them with the tools that they need, we're always going to be like, enslaved by the system. So that academy is doing incredible work currently. And I moved to Minnesota 8 years ago. I literally fell in love with Minneapolis. Coming from the South, I thought, Minneapolis is an incredible place, where we can truly bring a lot of beautiful change. But a lot of the progressive, politics were really getting on the way. And I got involved with the Police Oversight Commission in 2014. And in 2014, I also helped to organize in another community here in Minnesota to fire a police officer that was racially profiling Latino community in the area. And out of my business, I started doing contract work for different organizations to provide, civic information, youth leadership development. And out of that, 3 years ago, I came to the Capitol where I met an incredible woman. Her name is Becky Pringle, and she was testifying before the Policy and Finance Committee. And I was truly inspired by her speaking truth to power. And out of that, I ended up coming to work with her. And recently, I've been working in collaboration and as an activist as well for Brightbeam. And the last thing that I have done is we founded a political action committee, because one of the things that is really important for me is comprehensive immigration reform. So I'm a woman of action. What is it that we can do to make things better? And the political aspect of things is a way that many of our community members don't understand that we have an obligation and responsibility to take a seat at the table. And just because your name is Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio, it doesn't mean that they represent me. So recently we won the race for school board here in Minneapolis. And one of the reasons that I decided to run is because of my own experience, and also that I am the guardian of two nephews, one that is in middle school and another one that is in high school. And through them, I have seen how our school system is truly breaking down our babies. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Yes. And you all are living up to the fact that this is an amazing panel, and we're going to have a great conversation today. Just another housekeeping. Appreciate everybody in the comments. Make sure if you're coming to this conversation right now, if you're new to this conversation, because we've been on for about 18 minutes now, make sure you like and share this broadcast. We really want people to be a part of this conversation, and for it to be as interactive as possible. So join us in the comments. When you hear something that you really like, let us know. When you hear something that you want clarity on, let us know. And like I said, probably towards the end of our structured conversation here, we may bring up a couple questions that you all ask in the comments. So thank you all very much. So without further ado, I do want to get to the questions, right, around this issue around seeking common ground and what should our children be learning, right? Because there's been a lot happening, right, across the country at school boards. Lots of things have been politicized that's making the national news. And so we want to try to have a very structured conversation around all of those things and get some thoughts and feedback from this illustrious panel here. So the very first question I want to ask, every one of you will have an opportunity to answer this question. How has the pandemic affected what students are learning in terms of both content and priorities? And I will kick this first question to you, Dan.
Thanks very much. Great question. I would say that the pandemic has exacerbated inequities and challenges in our system that already existed. And so I guess one way to talk about it is, we have not done a very good job as a country of helping students, and this really includes all students who come to us with gaps in learning, other types of obstacles, who are behind where we would like them to be academically, and make sure they get on track. Unfortunately, most students, in spite of, by the way, incredible efforts by millions of educators in the trenches, it's not about effort, it's not about belief, but when students come to us with gaps, those gaps remain or even get worse over time. And so part of what is driving that, honestly, is a lack of belief among all of us adults that kids, and particularly kids from marginalized communities, are capable of excelling at the highest levels. And so low expectations in many cases influence what opportunities kids get to learn in the classrooms. Now, what does that have to do with the pandemic? Pandemic, of course, as we all know, produced tremendous pain and loss and disruption and trauma. That, of course, that is real. So we have more students with more challenges than ever before. But that doesn't mean we have any more students who aren't capable of doing work and excelling and reaching their goals at the highest levels. And so the risk, I would just say, I mean, I could go on this topic, but I know Zakiya will get to a lot of aspects of it. The fear I have is the pandemic will cause expectations to drop for kids of color, for kids who have special needs, for kids for whom English is not the primary language, multilingual learners, the kids who are traditionally marginalized in our systems will see even lower expectations because of the very real trauma and challenges and loss and pain, and won't really get a meaningful opportunity to get on track academically, socially, and otherwise. So it's going to be really, really important to guard against doing a bit of the poor kid. And so I worry about what experiences this poor kid has had. So I'm not going to push him at all. I'm not going to provide anything that's rigorous. I'm not going to provide anything that would give him the opportunity to really excel. So I think that's the challenge we face. It was a challenge we faced pre-pandemic. I think it's a bigger challenge now.
Yeah, and we appreciate that, Dan. I always find it interesting that people still have these ideas that children from, whatever, so, marginalized backgrounds can't learn the same as others. And so many teachers and academics have proven that wrong over and over again. Like when you were talking, the face of Marva Collins came up in my imagination, and thinking about how amazing she was in Chicago and how she pushed back, right? And eventually started her own school and all of this. And I'm just like, people are still thinking that, even though there's been, educators and Black educators in particular, I'm sure Marcus Foster is one of them, who proved that wrong, over and over and over again. It's very interesting. But
can I say something, Zakiya?
Sure.
What it makes me think, when is it that we're gonna be ready as a nation and to get away from this white supremacy, teaching, in the sense of whitewashing, history for our kids, and making them feel like, I'm the mother of two brown beautiful girls, that they attended school in Florida. A different system, different animal and monster that still eats our babies, because this food prison pipeline is so real. So when it comes to the content, teaching them the truth. Priorities, another priority is this government that we should be funding education, the federal and the state, government, and even the local government and the counties, need to invest heavily in education. Here in Minneapolis alone, for example, we are underfunded $67 million annually for special ed and ELL. So how do we, priorities is about money. For me, content is about getting away from this Western-minded, mentality of making kids of color feel like if you're not white, you don't fit in.
That's heavy. That's true. I wanted to bring up Christine. Same question. I'll repeat it for you. How has the pandemic affected what students are learning in terms of both content and priorities? You're a classroom teacher, right?
Yes.
You've been recently, in the classroom. So I feel like you have a definitely a perspective that we want to hear.
Thank you. I know I was listening to Dan specifically, and I get it, right? So I taught during the pandemic from a computer in my house, set up a little mini classroom for the students. But I like what Adriana is saying, right? The expectations for my students as an educator, all of us, remains high. I know later you'll talk about who's making the decisions, because many of the decisions are made outside of the classroom. But as we see and continue to believe that the educators in the building, the educators with the students, can be trusted to make those critical decisions about how to best reach them, how to set the bar high, have rigorous expectations, and then find ways to help the students to achieve that. So we were thinking outside the box. We did have to do a lot of pivoting away from what would be considered traditional classroom style education to using what we had. Many of our educational support professionals helped us, making sure that our students received the Chromebooks at the door, taking the Chromebooks to them, making sure they had meals, right? Because the school, we know, is where most of our students get their meals. So making sure that they, all those, as they say, right, Maslow before Bloom, right? Making sure that those basic needs are met, so that even when and during the pandemic, they had an option, a chance to be successful. So there were many of my students that where I was able to determine growth even during the pandemic, even during virtual learning, because we pivoted and did what we needed to do, and we worked with the families. You'll see across the country, I'm a big proponent of community schools as one of the NEA's big pushes, and thankfully the current I don't want to say president, but I'll say administration is giving us lots of money for states to really support community schools, because during the pandemic, we saw those districts that use the community schools model, where they already had established relationships with the families. The kids already knew that this was a trusted and protected place, an environment, that they continued that belief throughout the pandemic and then thrived. And so we are looking at that model from the community schools model, and how we can continue that even post-pandemic, and how we can really broaden that and win that in many places, because that relationship with our families, with our communities. I look at Adriana, and she talked about her sons, right? That building relationship with the school is what's going to help us to make sure the kids reach those high expectations. The other piece of that is, and maybe we didn't do a good job of this before the pandemic, but these needs are not new. We have to address the social and emotional needs of our students as well, right? And so, yes, I'm a math teacher, but I start every class with a mindfulness activity, trying to bring them in and make sure that they are very centered for the work. And I do social emotional instruction as well. Let's talk about building confidence. Let's talk about understanding our emotions. So I'm not just teaching math, I'm helping to reach them as individuals they are, because we have to make sure we address the whole child. And so, yes, I want them to know integers and absolute value, but I also need them to understand, how to make better choices in their life within the school and without. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Christine. And I hear you, Alicia. We're bringing you right on up. Same question.
I just love Christine. I just want her to teach every 4th and 5th grader math in America.
I know, right?
Because what Christine does is she loves her babies. She loves her students. And I think now more than ever in these times, what students need to learn and see is a demonstration of that love through education. And I think we're still very much in a crisis. I think looking at the chronic absenteeism numbers and realizing that, as I think Christina said, we're in a state of exacerbation of what was a reality for so many families. And it was easier to ignore it when we weren't all in a crisis together. So I think the more we can own and embrace that, the better. I think that if we are using the measures that are traditionally available to determine who is educated and who is uneducated, that generally as a society, we have accepted a very low standard for all children in terms of what they should be learning and how they should be learning it. And I think all of us experienced the pandemic, not just students who are on the margins. And if we don't start these conversations with everybody's trauma, we tend to have unidirectional solutions when we're not acknowledging that every adult in a school building has their own set of challenges, as we all do. And if we are not looking at the issues from that lens, we never get to a conversation about mutual accountability, right? So it's not just about gaps and how students show up, but it's about how everyone shows up to ensure the best possible outcome for students.
That's right. Thank you, Alicia. Adriana, I know you spoke already, but wanted to give you an opportunity if you had anything else that you'd like to add in terms of how the pandemic has impacted learning.
Yeah, thank you. No, I just wanted to follow up. I mean, listening to the other panelists, it's like, a lot of the problems, in my opinion, it's like how we are, like higher education is such a business in the US, for example. And when it comes to testing, for our children, unfortunately, that's the white supremacist way that was created. Like I'll give you an example for my oldest daughter. She was 1 point below in her SAT, so she could not enter the school that she wanted. So I mean, it's just so heavy, right? So heavy. So until we reform education nationwide, we will not achieve. And unfortunately, we don't even have the numbers, at the US Senate. So it's all political.
Yeah, definitely. Certainly. And I guess, unfortunately, as well, politics certainly play a role. Let's head to the next question. This one, is sort of what I was alluding to earlier during the introduction about, school boards and how, families and parents, if you will, across the country have politicized this idea of critical race theory. Critical race theory has not been taught in K-12 schools. In fact, it is a legal. It came out of law schools, right? Derek Bell, the amazing Derek Bell, is one of the founders of critical race theory, and he's written several books. Faces at the Bottom of the Well. If you hadn't read that, quick plug, check that out. It's a very interesting read, and I think the book may be 20, 30 years old now, but to me, it's almost like a prophecy. But anyway, so here's a question, right, around critical race theory. How is the furor, right, over critical race theory affecting what's happening in our classrooms right now? Because schools are open. Most schools in America are open, in-person learning. And we've already seen, like I said, several cases of maybe a principal being fired. I believe in Texas, he was let go. Teachers are also being targeted. Several states have passed laws. I mean, it runs the gamut. So I love to hear from this illustrious panel. And I guess, Christine, I'll start with you.
So,
right.
It's a lot. So it's interesting. I was just in a meeting with some of my fellow executive committee members, and one is from Wisconsin. And so he had just shared how they just passed maybe a law where they banned like certain vocabulary, even the word woke, right? It's just, yeah. And I had read another article not too long ago where there was a parent who felt that teaching about Martin Luther King made her children feel guilty, right? And so I just really think about, like, just, I don't know, when I grew up, I learned about Dr. Martin Luther King from my teachers, right? And many other who discovered the traffic light and the peanuts and all of this. And so when I hear this fervor of what we would say is just teaching the honesty in curriculum, right? Just what we've been doing, right? This has become like an attack on the people we trust with our kids. We trust, and thank you so much for saying how much I love my students, right? And that's how most of us We always say, my students, my children, our, and so we love them. And so we want to give them the best information they can to be great adults, because one day I am going to be that old lady they got to take care of. And I want them to be the smartest and the brightest and the best. And I want them to know the honest truth about the whole world around us, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so as an educator, that's what we want, right? We just want to make sure that every student, everyone, no matter where they live, no matter where their family comes from, where they were born, that all of them have a great starting place so that they can go forth and be the most amazing members of the society they can be. And if we hide things from them, how are they going to do that? Like, it doesn't make any sense. We all learned this growing up. Now all of a sudden it's bad. It's not bad. It's the truth. And every society goes through it. If I learn about Roman history, I learn about the fall, the rise and the fall, right? There's no hiding that. Why should we hide here? We don't need to hide it. We need to learn from it. Because if we don't learn from it, then we're destined to repeat. And so we can't shy away from just being honest in what we deliver to our students. And we need to trust those in front of our kids that we leave our kids with 6+ hours a day, that their hearts are in it and that they just want the best for their kids, just like you want the best for your kids.
That's right. Thank you, Christine. I appreciate you, sharing that. As a classroom teacher now, I imagine it's tough. I don't think New Jersey has passed anything draconian around.
No, New Jersey has amazing laws on curriculum, LGBTQ plus curriculum, the Holocaust. We are way ahead of the game. Since 2002, the Amistad curriculum has been law.
I remember.
Yes. So we are far from shying away. We are head first in it and making it law so that it's a guarantee that our students will have access.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so I will kick this next same question to you, Alicia. I'd love to hear sort of your thoughts, what you're seeing on the ground in your community, and how, if any, your organization has been responding to this attack on school boards across the country, and just on the idea of learning the truth.
Yes. Well, I live in Oakland, so, we have Black Panthers in the classroom. So I don't know. It's not a CRT, and any opposition to it is not something that we deal with regularly here. I certainly hear about the reports in other places in terms of the fervor and just the lack of intellectual capacity to even understand what CRT is, and the fact that CRT is not a thing, it's a lens, it's an analysis, right? But I think the furor over it is really telling in terms of how powerful it can be for our children to learn an analysis, right? And to have a perspective that is based in race and the reality of the experiences of the people who have built this nation. I think it's very telling. It is something that certainly needs to be a lens and applied to what children are learning, and how children learn matter just as much as what they learn, so that we're not solely depending on rote memorization in the classroom, but we're actually challenging our children to think critically about issues that affect them today and their families in the past and their ancestors and what's coming for them in the future. So yes, I think, at the Institute, we teach continuous improvement practices as a way for students to build their ability to think about power and influence, right? Resources, ideas, how decisions are made, why these decisions are made, so that as leaders, as future leaders of this community, they have an analysis of gentrification, right? Like they understand why homelessness is off the chain here, right? They understand, once they're college students, where their education fell short, and they understand exactly why and where the system let them down. And they build solutions to support students who are coming through, right? Because the reality is they're still coming through, right? And that we have to be vigilant about the analysis and clear and crisp and precise about how we think and talk about these issues. So the only other thing I'll say is I think there's been a conflation of critical race theory and ethnic studies, right? Like people think
yes, they have.
that's what it means, like, but that's not what it means. Ethnic studies is a completely different thing.
So true, so true.
So yeah, and I would just point everyone to, there was an EdSource piece not too long ago about the long-term educational benefits of students in the 9th grade in the San Francisco Unified School District and the positive impact that ethnic studies had on their academic outcomes. So of course, teaching a student about themselves, having an educator in front of you who sees you in many dimensions over time, and not being reduced to a footnote in a history book is critical in terms of helping a student form their identity. If that student's family doesn't have that knowledge and ability to access that information at home, it's critically important that our systems serve us, right? Like they're ours, they belong to us, and they should serve us. And so, yeah, I'm for ethnic studies. I'll see if I can find the link to that EdSource piece.
Yeah, we'd love to
put it in the chat.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'd love to have that, to put it in the chat. I appreciate Rashad Davis. He put in the comments, keep teaching it, right? And I appreciate that. And I actually agree with that. And it's unfortunate, though, in Tennessee specifically, and I'm sure there's other states, there's fines actually attached if you do just teach it, right? They anticipated that attitude, right? That they will actually fine school districts who are already struggling for resources to be able to teach fully. And that's really unfortunate. Dan, I wanted to get your thoughts on that. And if TNTP, your organization, has responded to any of this in any way, put out any kind of guidance or anything like that for the educators that you all are connected to.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's such an important question. And, you know, we're very fortunate that we do work in, as I say, you know, as I said at the beginning, small towns, big cities, but also kind of red counties and you know, blue cities and everything in between, and, you know, purple counties. And this is the backlash. You know, you hate to even justify or dignify the label critical race theory, because in my opinion, it is not about critical race theory. Which was a seminar I took in law school, and then, you know, didn't really hear much of it in K-12 education until now. But, you know, the architects of this backlash are pretty open and transparent. Zakiya, I'm sure you've seen it. No, not about critical race theory. It's about intentionally conflating critical race theory with anything that is about combating systemic racism and other forms of bias. And so, it is having that backlash is real. It is, you know, not just a couple of school board meetings you happen to see on TV. It is concentrated, I mean, unfortunately, in more conservative leaning counties and districts and states. And, you know, I will say, look, 2018, we put out a report called The Opportunity Myth, which had a lot in it. Some of you have seen it. It had some hard lessons and truths about racism at the systemic level. So when we were able to say, although we collected 25,000 pieces of student work, 40% of the classrooms that were mostly kids of color got 0 assignments at grade level, 0. So these kids were getting A's and B's, doing great, and had no chance to be on grade level because of decisions are being made at the system level. Well, I want to say leaders and educators in red counties and red states were stepping up and saying, you know what, we're going to confront this. And even before the CRT backlash, this was politically difficult to say we're going to sit our teachers down and talk about systemically low expectations for kids of color here in our community. That took some risk. Well, now that work that is specifically about racial justice in education is at risk. But here's the thing, Zakiya, things that may seem like they're more attenuated from this issue are also at risk. I know all of us on this call are thinking and working and concerned about lack of diversity in our educator workforce. That's a crisis, in my view. It is a crisis that we have only 20% of our teachers and about 20% of our leaders are people of color. We're leaving all kinds of brilliant people of color who would be great educators who are not in the classroom, not in schools right now, even though 53% of our kids identify as people of color. That's a crisis. That work, which ultimately really is about combating racial injustice, is at risk due to this backlash. So just to end, though, on a positive note, I believe in turn, your question was, what are we doing? I mean, I put an op-ed in New York Daily News that was just trying to level set, like, look, really speaking to my conservative friends, this issue of systemic racism is not ideology. This is not about, this is fact. Let me talk about the research, our research and many, many other pieces of research out there. This is just empirical facts. So as the other panelists said, if we ignore this fact, then we can't overcome it. We can't combat it. So there's that. But I will say there is a critical mass, including in red counties, red states, of people who do want all of our history to be taught. The good, as Christine said, the good, the bad, the mediocre, whatever, the indifferent, all of it, the warts and all. There's a critical mass of people who do want teachers to be able to teach fact, teach history, teach accurate history, who understand that teachers understand. They're not there to indoctrinate kids. They're there to expose kids to different viewpoints and think critically. So I think we have to mobilize those people, particularly in our more conservative leaning jurisdictions. And I think we will get there. Ultimately, we will be in a good place, in a more just place. But right now, Zakiya, it is really difficult out there.
It is. And I really appreciate each and every one of you, your comments on this, and also the work that you guys are doing in this space. Adriana, I want to bring you up as well. I think you're the only elected school board member that we have on the panel right now. And school boards, I guess, particularly in, like Dan said, in these red or purple areas, have been under siege for the last couple of months around this issue of critical race theory. Just wanted to give you an opportunity to offer any thoughts about what you see locally, and just also your thoughts in general about what's happening to your fellow school board members across the country.
Thank you, Zakiya. I mean, it's just that I live in Minneapolis. You know, we are a very special place in the universe where we have our angel, George Floyd, literally, you know, leading us into a higher level, you know, as humans. That's, you know, how I feel. But so we don't have to really deal with a lot of those issues here in Minneapolis. I have received only like one email from a concerned constituent that I did respond to. But, you know, so that's something that thank goodness, you know, I don't have to deal with. We deal with a lot of other obstacles and, you know, barriers that are just beyond belief. But anyhow, the way I see this, I mean, this is truly a war, you know, at the national level. You know, I'm not going to be able to convince people that are racist, that think that this is indoctrination, that this is harmful to their white, you know, frail children, blah, blah, blah. The way I see it is about organizing, about mobilizing, investing our resources to support people that are running for school board, you know, races, or, you know, for mayor, for city council, you name it. We must, you know, take a seat at the table and bring enough votes to pass, whether they're, you know, policies at the school district level, whether they are local ordinances at the city level or state, you know, level, federal level. It's like, we need to take those seats, you know, in our favor so that we can move this country forward. Because unfortunately, the people that are not with us, they're not. I'm not going to be able to sit down and have a conversation with Trump, you know, or Trump supporters. And just, you know, because they were never given that opportunity, you know. I mean, the seat of white supremacy is in the education system. And when our children don't know, we're going to keep perpetuating the same divisiveness. And in order to bring, you know, our nation to a true reconciliation, people need to know the truth.
That's absolutely right. People should know the truth. One of the things that I wanted to offer on this question really quickly before I pivot to the next question to you all is that I hear some news commentators saying, oh, we should listen to parents. Parents have every right to advocate at the school board level, and parents, should have a say in what their children are learning. And for those of you who don't know, I actually got my started in advocacy and activism as a Black parent, pushing back on school discipline policies that disproportionately targeted my baby. That's how I got in. He was 3 years old and being targeted for preschool expulsion. He was 3. Right. And there's entire organizations, including the one that I co-founded as a local organization that organizes Black parents specifically around these issues. But then there's national organizations, like Dignity in Schools and others who say, listen to parents, listen to Black and brown parents who are saying this is impacting their lives. This is impacting their children's lives. And I don't recall any news commentators coming to our defense. I don't recall anybody supporting us at the level that these parents, who are mostly white, showing up at school boards, combating CRT. In general, I support parent voice. I mean, because I wanted somebody to support my voice. But I think it's very interesting, and I would have been remiss not to point this out, that there is a groundswell of support for these particular parents to advocate for what they want their children to learn. But when it was Black and brown parents advocating for our children, there wasn't a national focus on that. There wasn't a groundswell of support to support us in our efforts. So I really had to point that out because I find it very, very interesting how much support these particular parents are receiving by news people, by other organizations, by even elected officials. I think I saw, although he's not elected, he's the former Secretary of State under Trump, Mike Pompeo, did a tweet. Parents have a right to say, what their children should learn. And he said, that's the tweet, right? Like that, and I'm like, wow, the former Secretary of State, right, is weighing in on this issue around CRT. Anyway, this is a good segue to the next question here. The next question is, who is deciding what gets taught anyway, and who should be? Christina, I want to bring you up again on this since you're in the classroom. Let me give you a first stab.
It's not me, is it? No one's bringing me to the table as a teacher, a classroom teacher, to decide. Not intentionally, unfortunately. And it goes all the way back to No Child Left Behind, right? When they decided, not to say, I don't want people to misunderstand what I mean about rigor and expectations, but were they realistic expectations, right? Are they really looking at where the kids are, what we have in place, and what we have to do to get the kids to a certain, and what's developmentally appropriate? I think that to me is always the fun part, right? When someone comes and say, well, you should be doing such and such with your students, and like you said, preschool, and we're like, well, they're 3, right? So let's start there first, right? And so who is really doing it is usually a textbook publisher, like you said, someone sitting at a desk that's never may have been in the classroom. Usually it's handed down to us. So when I'm in the classroom, and I am in the classroom just today, I had to run here to get here to be on this, right? Someone handed me a curriculum and said, you should do this. Now there's many of us who will say, that's cute, but this is really what my students need to know, vertical articulation, so they can be ready for the next thing, right? But that's a lot of advocacy on our part to do that. And that's because someone else has made a decision better, that seem to know better than us who are in the classroom working with the students and talking with our colleagues up and down the grade spectrum to say, okay, when they get in high school, they need to know this. So let's back map and decide what we need to teach them at all these other grade levels so that they're ready for that. But when we're the ones in the trenches who went to school for many years, I have my master's and working on my doctorate, but somehow I am not the master of my craft. That doesn't make any sense to me, right? So yeah, it's not us who are in the classroom working with the students, to be perfectly honest. It's usually handed down, it's usually crafted by someone who's unfortunately making money off the backs of our students, if I'm
Wow.
gonna be frank.
Right, right. And so who should be making those decisions though? Is there a collective from your perspective of interest, including educators, also maybe parents and administrators,
Definitely. I
and
smiled.
the educational ecosystem?
I
Yeah.
smiled when you said your story, Zakiya, about when you were talking about the progressive discipline that should be happening with our students instead of the zero tolerance, for example, and how there's no one that was coming at a national stage going, Zakiya is right. Let's get on the bandwagon and help Zakiya and her child and help other parents like that, right? But today, under, when we talk about honesty in the curriculum, now everybody has a say in it. But in reality, and going back to mine, I know people who are listening who knows me, it's like, oh, here she goes talking about community schools. But it is a perfect example of taking an assessment, having parents at the table, having administrators at the table, even having students at the table, by the way.
That's right.
Having students at the table to have input on what they should learn, why that's important, doing the research together, right? Because students can be part of the research to understand and be able to be spokespersons of why we need to learn what we need to learn. I mean, I don't know how many times as a math teacher I'm asked, like, what's this, we ask it of ourselves, right? How is this going to help me in real life? And I get to say, well, learning algebra is going to help you to be a critical thinker, right? And so I can talk about that. But I want my students to be able to have that same conversation as well. So having them at the table, having parents at the table and saying what they need for their students, for their children. I think it has to be a collective effort. It can't just be someone who is trying to make a profit. It can't be someone who's only done research but hasn't done research in child development, for example. Right? We have to take all of those factors into the decision-making piece.
Thank you so much, Christina. I appreciate that. And Alicia, I want to bring you up on the same question, right? Who is deciding what gets taught and who should be?
Yes. Well, the first thought I had when you asked the question was teaching to the test, right? Like how much effort goes into trying to do better on exams and just how much effort at that time of the school year, right? Like what happens and how people change because they're panicking and spending a lot of time and effort on the standardized tests. The second thought I had was an affirmation of living into what we want to see, right? To your question of who should be deciding. There is a phenomenal new organization in Deep East Oakland called the Black Cultural Zone. And they are doing amazing work in building community and working with the other really critical organizations based in East Oakland. And we're working with them on a project with graduate students at UC Berkeley, create what they're calling a liberation education. So sort of in the theme and tradition of the Saturday school model. They have zero trust in what the public schools can do to teach our children and how we help them understand what it means to be free, right? Because what is the goal, in terms of who gets to decide? I mean, the Rockefellers kind of set this whole process in motion in the United States, and they certainly had their motives for what children will be taught and how they would be taught. But how do we stop defining what and how and who children should be taught with the absence of what we don't want to see, right? Like, how do we set a standard with what we do want to see for our children? Do we want our children to be free? Do we want them to be creative and help solve these incredible world problems that we're faced with? Or do we want them to think with a scarcity mindset, with limited thinking, lacking creativity, and solely focused on how do we, address this problem, as opposed to opening up their imagination to all the possibilities? That's really, I think, what the Black Cultural Zone is trying to get to, and helping the children have free thoughts so that we can all be free.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Adriana, I want to bring you up. Same question. Who's making the decisions and who should be? What children are taught?
Is the white supremacist government that doesn't want our children to be liberated. All the corruption in the money-making machine of anyhow. I mean, it's just who should be at the table. It needs to be parents, students, and teachers, administration, all of us together. Because we need to ensure that we have the voice of our children at the table. I can give you a little, like my own experience with my youngest nephew. We came to Emerson, the school that he just graduated from, in January 2019. And by October 2019, the principal self-retired. You organized with moms. We took over the site council, the PTA, and we got white women, out of the way. This is a school that is 80% kids of color, and we never had leadership of brown people, Black people, at the table. And we started an after-school program, and we partner up with community ed to ensure that our children had transportation and food. But I mean, we had to fight our way through, Zakiya. It's just this, I feel like there's, not speaking for every school district or every school, right? We have incredible leaders in some of our schools, and in others we don't. But there's still like a sense of resistance. I just went to my oldest nephew's conference with his counselor, and before leaving the school, I kid you not, and I'm a school board member, but I'm also a parent, right? Before leaving, I said to the principal, "Oh, maybe I'll come and volunteer." And what did she say to me? "That would be a little too much." So these are the realities. We have to break through that and force our way in, because our children need us, and they don't have a voice at the table.
Thank you. That's interesting. That's a little too much, huh? Yeah, I don't know how to read. I do know how to read it to that, because it's happened to me several times. It's interesting that when, Black and brown parents, try to advocate for their children and try to be as involved, there are barriers and walls put up. And I have my own stories for sure. But Dan, I wanted to certainly get your perspective on this same question. Who is currently making the decisions about what children are learning in the classrooms, and who should be?
Yeah, I'm going to agree with comments from Christine and fellow panelists. I mean, people at the system level making curriculum decisions have a lot of power over what kids are being taught. And there's a lot of curriculum materials, as sure Christine, who's teaching right now, would agree with, that don't do kids any favors, that aren't rigorous, aren't relevant, don't lead to engaging instruction. And by the way, not just for young people, but for all of us. If we're not engaged, we're not learning, and we don't measure engagement, and we don't design curriculum materials generally with engagement, student engagement in mind, which is why I want to +1 Adriana. We need students at the table when we're making these decisions, for sure. And they are definitely a group that is not making the decision. But Zakiya, beyond the system level, which is important, I have to say there's a lot of agency at the principal level and at the individual educator, teacher level, that are making choices almost always for good faith reasons around goodwill and wanting to do what's best for the kids, but are not always best for the kids. I'll give you an example. When we talk about remediation, which generally involves trying to give kids reteaching what they've missed, and a lot of kids have missed a lot of instructional time, or reteaching what maybe we think they didn't master. There's a lot of bad stuff that happens that's based on bias and low expectations in the name of remediation. We put out a paper with Zern, which is provides an online elementary math curriculum. It was very interesting. Just indulge me for a second. What Zern did was figured out a acceleration pathway. So for kids who had missed things from the prior year, how do we get them caught up so they can master what they need to master for this grade's standards? Some teachers and some principals in some schools followed that acceleration pathway. Some decided that they were just going to review everything that the kids had missed from the prior year. They were going to do traditional remediation as opposed to what we call acceleration, which is based on making sure kids by the end of the year really learn what they need to learn to be ready for the next grade. And what do we find? A lot of bias embedded in that, in which kids get remediation and fall further behind, and which kids get acceleration and actually end up getting to grade level. So what we found is for kids of color who were not struggling with grade level material, they were much more likely to be getting review after review after review of last year's material, even though they weren't struggling, than were white kids. And so there is a lot of agency. A lot of it is unconscious, but there's a lot of agency over what kids actually get asked to do at the classroom level, at the school level, also definitely at the system level. And what I would say won't take a lot of time on this, Zakiya. How do we change this? Who should be at the table? We've got to have more visibility into what our kids are actually being asked to do. Not what we intend for them to be asked to do at the system level, but what are they actually receiving? Are they engaged? Are they being given rigorous, relevant materials where they can see themselves, they can see the connection to their aspirations or not? These are things that we don't know, that parents and families and communities don't know. If we have more visibility into what actually kids are experiencing day to day, then I think those choices end up being way more equitable.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dan, and really all the panelists. Thank you all for giving robust feedback on that question. This next question we've kind of touched on a little bit, but I want to give everyone an opportunity to really respond to this, because I do think it's critical to this current conversation that we're having. And so the question is, what role could and should ethnic studies play in promoting curricula that support our children's sense of self-worth and cultural pride? And Adriana, I think I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, when it comes to ethnic studies, I'm going to go back and throw it into the political reality of our state. Ethnic studies is not even a state standard in the state of Minnesota.
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. And kudos to our chair of the board, Kim Ellison. She did a lot of advocacy for that. It took her 6 years because we don't have a state standard, so that it could be implemented in Minneapolis public schools. So this was just voted on October of last year here in our district. So that tells you the reality of, Minnesota NICE. And once again, we don't have the numbers at the Senate, in the state Senate, in order to even pass, any type of comprehensive education, police, you name it, reform in here. So yeah, I'm excited about it. We're currently working and supporting some students from a high school that are working to advocate for LGBTQ plus curriculum. So we're doing everything that we can so that we lift up the voices of our students and change the reality here in Minneapolis. But when it comes to ethnic studies, my goodness, Zakiya, it's like of all places here in Minneapolis. Yeah.
Yeah, and the school district itself, the students are majority students of color in Minneapolis, right?
Exactly, but most of our teachers are white teachers as well.
Right.
And our kids are not reading at grade level. I mean, you name it. No. I am the very first Mexican to ever be elected to the board. And so I'm very hopeful, but we have our own challenges.
Yeah. Alicia, I want to bring you up because you actually introduced the idea of ethnic studies in the last round that we were talking about. And I did link to the study from San Francisco Unified. Wanted you to chime in a little bit more on that. What role could and should ethnic studies be playing in promoting curricula that support the children's sense of self-worth and their cultural pride?
Yeah, I mean, I have to answer the question, strictly from a personal perspective first, because I just know what it did for me. And I know that I wasn't exposed in a consistent way from a major institution in my life until I got to college, right? I think being at a predominantly white institution that had a very heavy science emphasis, but then having a graduation requirement related to ethnic studies was huge for me. And I didn't just learn about African Americans, right? Like I learned about all of the major immigrant waves that came into America from Ellis Island, right? Like that gave me a whole nother lens on America in a way that I didn't have before, right? So this is the beauty of understanding the commonality of everyone's history, the struggles, it gave me a sense and an analysis, right? To think more in terms of economics as opposed to solely race, and the way ethnicities are played against one another to support a capitalistic society, right? Like you come away with a different analysis than what you're being told. So I think it's foundational, right? It's learning about your own culture, and learning about the culture and experiences of others is what, I mean, it's what forms our humanity, right? It's a very fundamental aspect, I think, of a civil society. And so I think for it to get short shrift is very telling, right? Again, it goes back to the power of it, right? And the potential of it, and what it gives to students and their families, right? Because children go home and teach their parents, right? Like, did you know, right? Parents are like, no, I didn't. Like, how do I learn more about this, right? And again, I think it puts education in a different frame, and it encourages lifelong learning, right? Because there's so much to know in the world about so many different people. And some of it is just so not on the chronological or linear timeframes that we've been taught. And so it gives you a whole nother dimension in terms of time and thinking about the experiences, the human experience, right, on the globe. So I just think it's absolutely essential, and I'm for students, children, families getting it any way they can. It certainly should be a requirement, but it's interesting that it was a requirement for me at the PWI. I attended a state institution here in California for college, but we're involved in a coalition with the California State University system here in California. And we came out in this coalition that we're working on in support of an ethnic studies requirement for CSU graduates. And our CSU partners weren't too happy with us, right? CSU, California State University, right? And then, now the community colleges are gonna have an ethnic studies requirement, which I think is really exciting. So in a place like California, we're really fortunate in a lot of regards, right? It's really expensive to live here, but there are lots of, there are societal benefits, right? Where you can halfway justify the amount of taxes you're paying, and what you're paying for housing, because it really does matter, right? Like this stuff is not an ancillary or minor consideration, right? Like this stuff is as important as teaching kids to code, right? Like we've got to understand that. And so I'm really proud of my state and the leadership that it has around ethnic studies.
I appreciate that, Alicia. Christine, I wanted to bring you up with this question. You mentioned earlier when we were talking about CRT in general, that New Jersey actually has law around Amistad curriculum, Holocaust curriculum, and other types of curriculum that could be packaged as sort of like an ethnic studies. Can you speak a little bit more to just sort of what your experience, I know you teach math, but like what you have observed from your colleagues who are charged with teaching these different curriculums that the state has mandated there in New Jersey. And if you believe that there is a correlation in the children's sense of self-worth and cultural pride being taught the true history about their lineage here in the United States.
I sure can. I do want to say, so someone put in the chat, Peoples, her last name is Peoples, and she just hit on something that was so important, right? And so, yes, New Jersey, Amistad curriculum, 2002, it's been there. The Holocaust, same thing, been in, now just recently LGBTQ plus curriculum. So we have this, right? The challenge, however, to Ms. Peoples' point is the accountability piece. So for me, the Amistad curriculum has been on the books since 2002. But it wasn't until New Jersey put it into their accountability system that they have for self-evaluation for districts, where they had to do a walk around and do a check to see if it's really being taught. Was it really being taught to its fullest, right? So the thought behind all of this, and so the big umbrella of ethnic and social studies, is that it's infused throughout the curriculum. So yes, right now we're inundated. We are right in the midst of Hispanic Heritage Month, which is wonderful and awesome. And we do, thank you, Tanisha. And then we do Black History Month and Women's History. And so we do those in the pockets, and this is standard. I've been a math teacher for years, but I've also taught many other elementary school and the such. And so we do those in the pockets, right? The challenge is that we don't infuse it throughout. And so that's the point of these specific directives, right? That don't just teach, right? As we say, it's Black History 365, Hispanic History 365, Native people. It really needs to be, because one, our students need to see themselves, right? So when I'm teaching math and I'm giving examples, I want to pull right from my students' personal experience so that they can make those connections. So if I'm only talking from one aspect of the society, then they either phase out or it doesn't really connect to them. So I have to speak from their place, right? I have to bring in their own personal experience. And I learned so much, right? I learned about a different type of taco that I can't wait to try today. And I learned that in a math class, right? I'm excited. And my students are excited because they see themselves as I talk from their experience. We have to be very specific. And I used to work at a middle school for the arts. And throughout the year, the population was mostly Latinx. And so throughout the year, we planned for this major showcase at the end of the year. And the students were so engaged. We got to learn about their family's history, where they came from. Their families came in. They made regalia that was of their different countries that their families were from, and they did dances and music and art. That engagement, that level of inclusive engagement was magical. And then we layered in the 3 R's, right? Reading, math, arithmetic. We had writing. We layered in all of that, but we layered it in where the students saw themselves. And by the way, other students who were from different ethnic backgrounds got to learn about others as well. And I think as we look at what's happening in this country over the recent years, this major divide, I'm not ignorant. I know that there's always been a racial and social divide in this country, but it's really become like horrific. But I feel like because our students are not exposed to learning and loving each other, all the wonderful things that we all bring in based on our ethnicities and our backgrounds, right? And so ethnic studies is so important from pre-K on up, right? We can't wait till college to get a course on ethnic studies. I can't wait till high school to teach about. We have to infuse it in every aspect of what our students experience right from the beginning, as soon as they step their foot in the door of our schools.
Amazing. Thank you. And Dan, certainly not, least, but, last opportunity here to answer that same question. What are your thoughts around that question?
Yeah, I'll be quick because I don't have anything much to add to the great responses you gotten from my fellow panelists. But I would just say, if we ask students about their engagement, about where and what classes and with what subjects they feel successful, they feel seen and heard, they feel like they're being pushed and challenged and learning. And if we ask students about that in a systematic way and made sure that everybody saw that data, we would have ethnic studies everywhere, because students want to learn, and not just about their own ethnic background, but about the ethnic background of their fellow students and community members. And so if students had a greater voice, we would have more ethnic studies all around the country, because kids would learn and engage, as my panelists have said.
Yeah, we have about 10 more minutes left for this conversation. So I do want to get to, maybe one more question. So this next question is, could current standards around testing and accountability systems be better leveraged to push for curriculum or push the curriculum in positive directions, like great rigor and relevance and more cultural awareness and responsiveness? Or do we need an entirely new system? Christine, I'll kick it to you first.
And I'm sitting there going, that is a mouthful, right?
Yeah.
So going back to Tanisha and the accountability piece, so there's always going to be that, right? And it's unfortunate, right, that it feels like people won't do unless their feet are to the fire, right? Unless there's a checkbox for them to check. But, not, and to Dan's point, if it's just really to get students excited about learning, that might be a lot, right? And then when I look at the standards, right, and we're always, I have a workshop right now going off the side of me talking about the standards, right? Right. Thank you, the virtual world. But the reality is, are the standards really speaking to what our kids really need to know? A couple of years ago, we met with some community colleges in the area and some jobs, and we asked them, what do the kids need to know to be successful? And sure, there's the standards on math and reading and writing and history, but it was a lot about learning how to engage, how to work together, how to work with others, how to understand others. It was a lot about that, a lot of the jobs said, just send us students, send us workers who are ready to learn, right? Who are ready to work with others, who can work as a team, because a lot of work that's being done now is collaborative. Right. And I don't think we do enough of that. We are teaching to the test. I heard Dan say it, right? We are teaching to the test. We're still doing that. We got rid of No Child Left Behind, but we're still doing it. We haven't thought more advanced. We haven't thought about how do we really prepare these students in this diverse and independent world, how to think globally, right? How to interact and work with others who are not just like them. Like, I grew up in Trenton. Mostly at the time I grew up, a Black community. But when I go out into the real world doesn't look like what Trenton looks like. And I have to be ready to be successful with all of the people I meet, right? Understanding where they're coming from, how they think, right? And I need all of my children, all of my students to be able to do the same thing. So we have to look at our curriculum. We have to look at our standards and say, how are we doing this, right? Right? And yeah, don't get me started, Rashad, talking about standardized testing, right? There's nothing standardized about our students. So why are we trying to do that? Thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting perspective. Dan, I'll bring you up next for this same question, right? Could current standards, testing, and accountability systems be better leveraged to push curriculum in positive directions, like greater rigor and relevance and more cultural awareness and responsiveness? Or do we need new systems? What's your thoughts?
I mean, look, the technical answer is the standards that most states have adopted, which were designed to create a staircase for kids to be ready to succeed, not just go to college, but succeed in college. Like, that's had an effect. I would say there's more rigorous, and also culture relevant materials that are out there now that you can get off the shelf than there were even 5 years ago. So the standards have had some positive impact. The accountability systems, I mean, look, I would say we have seen. I'm old enough to have gone to school when standardized tests just happened once in a while, and nobody knew what they showed, and the powers that be were able to sweep systemic racism and other forms of bias under the rug. So I am very uncomfortable with any system that doesn't produce some level of data about what kids are learning and which kids are getting opportunities to learn. Having said that, we need a much more holistic view of what kids are experiencing day to day. Agree with Christine, like what they actually need to achieve, particularly from marginalized communities, what they need to achieve economic security when they leave our care, and to be able to contribute generational wealth to their families and communities. Like, we need to know all that. That's not even something we measure now. So I think we need actually much more holistic measures. And I hope, but I haven't seen it yet, that there are going to be states that are going to take some of this once in a generation infusion of federal money to begin to pilot some of these more holistic measures, because I think we need them. I
appreciate that, Dan. Thank you. Adriana, I want to bring you up on this.
I'm just holding my tongue in here. I just want to.
I saw you itching.
I am of the idea we need a total new different system, like burn it down, but we got to build it up. And how do we do that? In my opinion, I mean, for example, like I attended, elementary and secondary school in Mexico, and secondary school is like 3 years. Okay. And that's like the equivalent of middle school and high school together. By my 3rd year of secundaria, I was taking trigonometry classes. And in order for me to graduate from secundaria, we were expected to do like a mini thesis on Western civilization in my Spanish class. I was like 14 years old.
Wow.
Seriously. So when I came to the US, I was just shocked, seriously, at the things that we were being taught. I didn't know the language. That was a huge barrier. Nothing was given to me, any type of support. If anything, actually, my welcome to America was with a very racist teacher that was handing out a quiz, my very first day of school, and she wouldn't allow a classmate to help me. And then she made a comment of like, she didn't know white people like me came to this country. And my friend told me what she said. So it's, to me, it makes no sense. Like, even with my girls, my youngest one, she was doing gifted classes. And I don't understand why we have to have expectations of kids, that are more advanced. And I get it, our children, everybody learns in a different, in a different way. Right. For me, put the one-on-one support if I'm behind. Give me that individual attention, that is needed. So, we need a new system, but for me, the way that we build that system and take it back into the political arena is so that we prepare our kids and also inspire them, to be the next political, representative. I know Jason's class is watching, so I will encourage all of you to get involved, volunteer, do something. If you don't have a voice, someone that is running to be that voice, ensure that you support that individual. Because, enough of complaining is about how do we collectively create the solutions and transform the system.
Yeah. Alicia, we're coming up on time, but I definitely want to hear your thoughts on this question.
Okay, there we go. Okay. It's such a great question. I mean, and I think tactically leveraging, the new resources coming in and the desired policies around improving outcomes for students. I think it's a great sort of mashup and way of thinking about changing. I'm a little bit agnostic about new versus existing, because I think much of what we would build would have the same sort of remnants of what our major challenges are now. I would advocate that we think more about how we work and how we educate our children. I think the brilliance that's represented on this panel and the brilliance in the chat demonstrates that we know the issues, right? Like, and you mentioned Marva Collins earlier, Zakiya, and I mean, she was with me, right? She's been with me for the last few days thinking about this panel discussion. I think the genius is there, right? Like we know what to do. The question is, how do we do it? And this is where I think the mutual accountability question really comes into play. How do we build in practices where we are continuously evaluating what we're doing as opposed to waiting for the annual high stakes test, right? How do we build culture around improvement so that, the teachers, the other adults in the building, the parents, the students feel a sense of community about what it means to be an educator, to be educated, to be in a learning environment that makes room for everyone, right? I think that it's a big task, right? It's a big ask, but the methods are there, right? Like there are methods that we can implement and integrate into our current systems or build them into a new system, right? Of educating children so that they're successful and so that, society is civil, right? So, I think the questions of accountability are going to continue to surface in a new or old system. And how do we build a culture together that's built on that mutual accountability and that lack of defensiveness around the fact that we all can be better, that we all have something to learn, that we all need to be thinking about how we improve the education commodity and how we're all engaged in co-creating what those experiences should look like.
Thank you, Alicia. And thank you to this entire panel, Dan, Christine, Adriana, Alicia. This has been so good. I mean, the comments in the chat, I'm so glad that you all can see them. As you all can see, people are very, very much in tune to what we're talking about here. And I apologize, to the people in the comments. We did not get a chance to get to all of your questions or to a lot of your questions, but thankfully some of the panelists actually acknowledged some of your comments. So that we could see you, and we appreciate you all being so active and being very much a part of this conversation. This is exactly what we wanted. Again, I want to remind everybody who's listening, this is a 4-part series. This is the first one. So join us again next Wednesday, again at noon. We'll be here from noon to 1:30, and we hope that you all return for that conversation. We're looking forward to that as well. So again, thank you everybody for joining us. This has been a special edition of Building Power, of which I host every Wednesday at noon Eastern Time here at the Brightbeam Network and on Citizen Ed TV. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Take care.